So welcome everyone, it's Natalie Ashdown here with you, and welcome to our Coaching Cafe. If you're listening to this live, and I know a lot of you are, welcome back. Happy Friday to you all. And if you're listening to this not live, then hope you're having a happy day as well. So this is our second webinar. We've got three webinars in this little series about shifting underperformance in the workplace. And this is our second webinar as part of the series, and all going well. My slides should be tabbing, so hopefully if you could just pop a message in the chat box that my slides are working properly, that would be great. Last time we met, I recorded the first part of our shifting underperformance, and we talked about a number of different ideas around shifting our mindsets around underperformance. That video, that recording, I actually re-recorded yesterday, and it should be up on our website or up on our blog or Facebook or somewhere, so you can pick up the first part of our discussion. Thanks, Jody. Thanks for letting me know. So the first part of our discussion was all around shifting our mindsets, reframing the idea of underperformance to how do we shift, lift, build, raise performance. Today we're going to be looking at the performance coaching model. It's a model that I actually just redesigned. Thanks, Jenny. It's a model I just redesigned based on a model that we have in our Certificate 4 in Workplace and Business Coaching program. So we'll be focusing on the performance coaching model today. And then we've got part 3 coming up next week as well. So hopefully you'll be able to hook into the different ideas across the 3 series. For those of you that are new, there's a few new people on the line. Welcome to you. We are all about creating a community, sharing our experience, having some thought-provoking conversations, and of course, welcome back to the majority of people on the line who are awesome coaches, as I can see, and who are fairly regulars. So as always, interact with me via the chat box. You know, I love to pick up your comments, and I love to pick up your questions as well, so that we can make this interactive. If you haven't been to one of our coaching cafes before, that's totally fine. We are offering CCEs, so continuing coach education units, if you're actually collecting those for your ICF credential. They are offered completely free of charge. You just have to be on the line for the full 30 minutes. So it's always great. We get on the line a little bit earlier to make sure that everyone's right, and today that my presentation is working as well. So let's kick into our conversation. When we last met, we were talking about changing the approach to conversations, and we started to think about a couple of coaching tools that we could use. The main emphasis when we're talking about underperformance was to change our language and change our mindset, to change it from, you know, let's discuss your underperformance, or I've got an underperformer, to I need to talk to you about how we can shift, lift, or raise your performance. So swapping out the word underperformance for shifting, lifting, raising, anything we do around that is going to make a massive difference to the conversation that we're having. And because I can see all the great coaches in your workplace on the line, I know that you'll be coaching people in this. So a lot of the coaching we actually have to do when we're helping managers address people who are underperforming is actually coaching managers to change their mindset, to stop thinking about people as being underperformers and think about them as people that we need to shift, lift, or raise the performance of. And really, it's a mindset, and it's a change in the way we communicate that really needs to become a bit more of a habit, because we're used to referring to a person as an underperformer. So they really need to shift their mindset, and that's where your great coaching comes into it. So, most of you have seen this diagram before. This is the impact on employees' performance in a performance review or a performance discussion if we're only focused on their weaknesses. So if we're only focused on people's weaknesses, either their personal weaknesses or the weaknesses, what they're not doing in the job, if we're only having conversations about what people are not doing and about their underperformance, then it's not going to be motivating. It's not actually going to get the change in performance that we actually really desire and we actually really want. So this research is about change in performance. So if we want to change performance, shift performance, lift performance, raise performance, then the research says that a focus on performance strengths is actually what's going to enable that. So this is another conversation we can be having with the managers. It's how do we stop focusing on weaknesses and actually start focusing on strengths and leveraging the strengths and building on the strengths. Now, that's not to say that we don't. Quite often in workshops at this point, I get challenged. So what? You don't want to put reality on the table. So we're just going to wrap them up in cotton wool, are we? And we're just going to skip through the daisies and sing Kumbaya. So, I do get quite challenged on this idea, and I'm completely open about that. It's not that we're not focusing on what's not right, or it's not that we're not focusing on reality. You will know from the way that we talk about the approach to the GROW model is what we are really focusing on is what are we really trying to achieve. So as we discussed in our first webinar together, the first webinar as part of this 3-part series, when we discussed our first webinar, we talked about what is it we really want to achieve. We want to lift, we want to shift, we want to raise the performance. What's happening now? So just applying the GROW model, how do we have a conversation about where do you need to be, what's happening now, and what are the options to start changing your performance, to lift your performance? How do we really leverage your strengths to really work on higher performance in the workplace? That's a conversation I actually feel much more comfortable to have, and I've actually had myself. So don't forget that whenever I'm sharing anything with you, I'm really walking my talk on this. I'm really focusing on saying, well, this is where we need to be. So what options do we have to get there? And the GROW model really kicks in there. The GROW model kicks in, and what I wanted to emphasize is it's backed up with research as well. So let me just pause for a second. Tell me if anything that I'm sharing with you is resonating with you. Any comments that you might have, I'm happy to share with the group. Any questions at all? And as I mentioned, I've re-recorded that webinar, that first webinar, so you'll have the slides there as well. A number of people wanted the slides because I did a lot of reframing, so the slides are working as well. You can pick that up off the website. Okay. So I presented 3 ideas for you in the first webinar. This webinar is to present the 4th idea, which is what we're calling a performance conversation model. Now, there's lots of different models out there for performance conversations. I came up with this model based on Happy, Sad, Happy. So those of you that have done our certificate for in workplace and business coaching would know about our needs analysis tool for Happy, Sad, Happy. And you would know that it's not the old hamburger, say something good, say something bad, say something good. It really is about focusing on people's strengths, their challenges, and how they can move forward. So I came up with this variation of the model. I remember it so clearly. I was on an aeroplane actually, and I remember that I was going, I'd come off some big sessions. I was going into some big sessions, and for some reason I was really focused on what kind of conversations do people have to have? And I just really brainstormed it because something was really annoying me. It was like all of these conversations I'd had about performance, all these conversations I'd had with people where they're talking about underperformers, underperformers, underperformers. It was almost starting to annoy me, not annoy me, but I knew there was something that we had to discuss. And that was where the big reframes came into it. And that's where this model came from as well. Jody says it makes sense. It helps the coachee to access the resources to lift performance. That's a terrific summary. Thanks, Jody. That's exactly what we're talking about. How do we access the coachee's resources, their resources to lift their performance? Thank you. That's an excellent way of describing it. So here is the model that I designed, and you can see that it's actually looks like the needs analysis model from our Cert 4. I have just changed a lot of the questions around, but you'll notice also that I've also changed the acronym as well. So it's not happy, sad, sad, happy. It's the PCIP model, PCIP. And what we're really doing here, and feel free to take a screenshot as well, is when we're having a conversation, we're starting off, and you can actually start using this for your regular performance conversations, or your annual performance conversations, or biannual performance conversations. We're really focusing on, well, what's going well? What do you feel that you've achieved? What are you particularly proud of? Now, those of you that know me, and there's lots of people on the line that have worked with me, you know that's one of my favourite questions. So what are you particularly proud of? How have you been playing to your strengths, or how can you play to your strengths, and what would you like to celebrate? So it's a lovely way of using any of those questions for a really quality conversation. You can take any of those questions in isolation and use them, or you can package them together to have a really quality conversation. Whenever it comes to performance, if we're talking about a person who needs to shift, lift, or raise their performance, I would definitely, and have definitely in the past, used these questions. So you need to shift, lift, raise your performance. Let's talk about first what you're actually particularly proud of. What do you think is going really well? What do you feel that you have achieved in the workplace? So we're really drawing out what's been going really well. What are they particularly proud of? And then we're actually thinking about, well, where have you been experiencing challenges? Now, this is taking a complete coaching approach. As Jody says, we're actually asking the coachee to access the information for themselves, to think about their performance for themselves. So where have you been experiencing challenges? Let's talk about that. What's been the impact of those challenges? So you've been experiencing some challenges. What's been the impact of those challenges? Now, this is where the coaching particularly is important, because you can agree, yes, I definitely think there's been some challenges there. I definitely agree that there's been an impact in terms of the challenges. My next question is, so what are you going to do to overcome those challenges? Or how can you overcome those challenges? Or how did you overcome those challenges? So again, in terms of our sentence construction there, slightly changing that word, how did you overcome the challenges? The answer might be, well, I didn't and I haven't. So then the obvious question comes up, doesn't it? So what will you do now to move forward? How can you overcome these challenges? And this is where the feedback conversation comes into it as well, because you can actually say, I think that is really important. That challenge, that issue, that problem needs to be resolved because it is impacting your performance. Okay, so I'm not beating around the bush. I'm not trying to sweep the performance under the carpet. I'm basically saying that when I think about where we need to be, where you need to be, where this project needs to be, this is an area for change. This is an area that we can't afford not to look at. Thank you, Tanya. She says, I really like the visuals on this slide and how you framed the question. Yeah, we spent a bit of time. I like the idea of proud. I like the idea that there's that we talk about the challenges and then Thank you. Yeah, the next idea is about improvement. And for me, it's about where we are now to where we want to be. So that's basically just using your straight up grow model there as well. Feel free to take a slide shot, like I said. Yes, thank you, Jenny. She says it's good timing to insert constructive feedback. Excellent. So you can see how this is working, can't you? So you take your constructive feedback conversation, and that's a perfect time to insert it. We talked about this on our first webinar together because what if someone's got a complete blind spot? So if they have got a complete blind spot and they don't see that there's actually an issue here, that's where you could actually raise, I see another challenge in this area. What's your opinion of that, or what's your thinking of that, or how are you experiencing that? So you can put a challenge on the table, that you can put the impact as well on the table as well. Yeah, and your constructive feedback conversation allows you to do that. Fantastic. The improvement. Now, I like this. So I've changed, as I said, changed around happy, sad, happy. This model actually works for me way better than happy, sad, happy, actually, because it is actually talking now about, so we've talked about what you're particularly proud of. We talked about where the challenges are. Now, let's talk about improvement. So what can you focus on to continuously improve in your role? Or you don't even have to use the word continuous. Let's just use it as it is. What can you focus on now to improve your performance in your role? What can you focus on now to shift your performance, to lift your performance, to raise your performance? I love this question because you can swap in whatever word actually works for you there. What would you like to change or do differently? What can you change or do differently? And as Jenny said, if they're not picking up what does need to change, you can actually insert that there as well. We're going to take a coaching approach here and say, well, what would be the benefit of these changes? So where do you need to change, or what do you need to do differently to improve your performance in this area? What a beautiful question. And if you did that, what would be the benefit to you? What would be the benefit to the team or to the project or to the organization if it's that important as well? So we're thinking about how we're actually coaching the person with getting them to think about, well, where is the area for improvement? If they've got a complete blind spot, you might need to point that out, and I'm completely comfortable with that as well. So thanks, Peter. He says, at what point would you slide into the conversation around the organisation mission, vision, values and goals, and discuss the employee's performance against those? Yeah, great question. The reason I ask is that these conversations are benchmarked against those things. So that is really great. I would, two things, you can tell me what you think about that, but I would insert that at the beginning of the conversation. So about the proud. So you could ask a question, when you think about the last 6 months or the last 3 months or the last month or the past week, what are you proud of in terms of the mission, vision, values and goals? Or you could ask a question about how aligned do you think you are to the mission, vision, values and goals? So they're 4 different things, obviously, that you could say. How would you rate your alignment towards mission, vision and goals? Are you experiencing any challenges with those? If they are not in alignment, I'm thinking this through with you. If they're not in alignment, then you could bring it up at the beginning in terms of, I'd like to talk to you about how your performance relates to the values, visions and goals. What are you particularly proud of? Or you can definitely bring it up in improvement. So when I'm thinking about the mission, vision, values and goals of the organisation, and that's what you're benchmarked, what can you focus on in terms of continuous improvement so you're becoming closer to the values, vision and goals? Because that's what we're benchmarked against. So some sort of conversation like that I can see working. You know, I can also see the person saying, what do you mean? Are you saying that I'm not in alignment? Is that what you're saying? So what, you're saying I don't live the organisation values? So I wouldn't get caught up in that. Remember, go back to our feedback conversation. Think about what you're trying to achieve. Think about why this conversation is so important. And if you've done that preparation beforehand, then it might be something around, I think there's always areas for us to get closer in alignment to the values. And I need to share with you that in this instance, it didn't feel like you were aligned or something like that. So you might have to put the feedback on the table if they're not in alignment and they're defensive or they're thinking that they were. So some sort of blind spot there as well. Jenny says, I think the question about rating of alignment to vision, etc., sounds like it's better timing to bring it up in the improvement conversation as opposed to at the start when they happily talk about their proud achievements. Your thoughts? Yeah, I feel that with you as well. I'm thinking the feedback, if there's a feedback conversation to have, then you could do the feedback conversation just as the feedback conversation. So think about what you're trying to achieve, why it's so important, step through those questions that we ask and then prepare your script. So your performance conversation could actually be the feedback script that we have in our certificate for workplace business coaching. So I agree with you there. The alternative is you could bring it up through this kind of conversation as well. Yeah. Yeah, so I see that yeah, I could see the models working separately, like this one might work better in that situation or this one might work better in that situation, or you could blend them like you do. Yeah. Yeah. Peter says that's excellent, thanks. Also I would assume that the pre-communication would include that the conversations coming up are around the above, therefore they would come with a scaffold. Therefore, would they come with that scaffold? Is the Johari window an effective way to address the blind spots? Yes, I do think it is. And yes, we're scaffolding, so we're building on the conversations from the past. Yes, I agree with you there. So I like Johari, and we have used Johari quite a lot. What I have moved more towards now is the little model that I introduced in our first webinar on performance conversations. So remember the 2x2 matrix that I introduced? More start, what I would like to start and more of, and stop and less of. So start, stop, more of, less of. I prefer that model now, because if someone has got a blind spot, that's great. We recognise they've got a blind spot. What are we going to do with that? So that's where the stop, start, more of, less of conversation comes into it for me. Yeah, and as I said, these are just ideas. So toss them around, work out what fits for you as well. So when it comes to improvement, what can you focus on for continuous improvement? What would you like to change or do differently? What a brilliant question. I love it. What would be the benefit of those changes? So I like the backup question here. Quite often we ask, what would you like to change or do differently? We also need to ask what I call the backup question, which is the kind of question that cements it. What would be the benefit of those changes? And as you know, I'm very big into finding what I call response potential. So it's always great to think that I might change something, but what would be the benefit of it? So let's get very clear about what would be the benefit of that, and then what do you plan? So the P is the how do you plan to move forward on that? And if you have introduced some feedback where they have blind spots, perfect opportunity for that as well. So what do you need to start? What do you need to stop? What do you need to do more of? What do you need to do less of in order to shift, lift, raise your performance from where you are now to where you want to be? So, if you actually saw me, like if I had my video on, then you'd see me with, my arms are moving, I'm pointing to where we want to be. It's all the hands are all going on. So that's from where we are now to where we want to be. That's, or you can draw it on the whiteboard, or you can, whatever works for you. So the next part of our model is now that we've got that response potential, we're having these conversations. The next part is obviously then let's round it off with what steps can you take to move forward? What's the plan for the next period, whether that's 8 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 1 week, whatever it might be. And then what resources do you need? What do you need to call upon, either within yourself or outside of yourself, to pull that off? How can you leverage your strengths? How can I support you? So all these great questions come in now to finalize the conversation for this point. Now you can see what's happening here. The coaching is actually saying, so what resources do you need? How can you leverage your strengths? How can I support you? How do you want to write this down? How do you want to record it? So remember, in our first performance conversation we had, the last week's webinar, we talked about it's really important that the employee takes responsibility for the plan to move forward. One of the ways they do that is they actually write the plan, or they take the notes, or they write up the action items. And then once they've written up the action items, they can send it back to you as part of the agreement. Too often the manager's doing all that work, and I've really encouraged this in the workplace, and it seems to really work, that the more that we allow the employee, the coachee, to take responsibility, the better. So here, any coaching that comes into about the plan and how you're going to move forward, and they take responsibility for it, is really important. Oh, another great question. Thanks, Peter. He's on fire. Is there room for what would it look like when those benefits are realised? Yes, great question. So what would it look like when those benefits are realised? That is a terrific question. Yeah. Sorry, Catherine. Yeah, it just cut out for a second. So the question was, what would it look like when those benefits are realised? The question in the improvement section, yes, you can add it there. Could it further cement the enthusiasm around moving forward? Yes, that's great. So, you know, add any scaling questions in there that you like too. So what would make this easier for you? On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are that you can move forward? So yeah, bring your scaling questions in. How confident are you now? How confident are you that you can actually pull this off? And I don't mind even putting a little bit of feedback on the table there. So I'm really keen to understand, how confident are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Because, you know, last time you said that you would do this and you actually didn't. So we need to ensure that this job gets done, or this task gets done. So what's it going to take to actually pull this off this time? Because we don't want to be having another conversation, you know, blah, blah, blah. Jenny says, I'm thinking that the impact question is useful, especially if their desire to change and perception of benefit is little. Yeah, so it comes down to willingness, doesn't it? We've always said that coaching is always built on willingness. So if there's no willingness, then I probably should have said that up front, I suppose. If there's no willingness, then you're taking another performance management pathway that can still use coaching, but you're introducing first warnings, etc., etc. So yeah, actually, I have had someone use this performance conversation model alongside first warnings. So there you go. She says, Jenny says, I'm thinking that the impact question is useful, especially if their desire to change and perception of benefit is little, and their personal agenda is stronger than alignment with the organisation vision or direction. She says that's when the conversation about cost or loss, if they continue the undesirable behaviour, will lift their awareness. Yes, typed a bit slowly, seemed to be backtracking a little, didn't mean that. No, that's totally fine. Yes, so I agree with you. So the conversation about the benefit, what's the impact if nothing changes? If they continue to the undesirable behaviours, if they continue the undesirable behaviours, if they continue at the level of performance they're at the moment, what will be the impact of that? Because that needs to change. Something needs to be different here. We need to change this. You need to shift, lift, raise your performance from where you are now to where we need you to be. So that's where I am emphasizing kind of this script, because it actually really works. So I don't mean to labour the point on it, but the kind of words I'm using here we find actually really help. Don't forget, how can you leverage your strengths? How can I support you? What else do you need? As I mentioned, lots of scaling questions come in at the end here. So last time we had this conversation, you didn't deliver. So what's going to be different? What do you need to do? What are we going to do to learn from this so it doesn't happen again? You know, any of those great questions, anything that you want to add in there to make sure that plan is more solid is a real benefit as well. So I can see we're right on time. Let's just see what else I've got here. Yeah, okay, so we're right on time. Takeaways, actions, join us for the next webinar. All very important. Any final questions or thoughts before we close off? Peter says, I found that intentionally building an other focus can help the person step out of their insular thinking and realise their performance impacts their colleagues. Yeah. Could you ask questions around the benefits to their colleagues and friends in the workplace? Well, that's excellent as well. Yeah, I need to cut and paste all of these great questions that everyone's asking. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I definitely agree. So if you were to think about the impact of where you are now and what's happening now on your friends or colleagues in the workplace, how might you rate that, or what might you say about that? And where would you like to be on that, and how can you move forward on that and shift and lift and raise your performance? So yes, anything that you want to add in there, it all works, doesn't it really? I think you can still take the framework and you can work those questions in as you go. Yeah. Jenny says, I like the model, very practical, and I can see how this puts the accountability back to them for their own performance review rather than the manager telling them. Yes, thank you for sharing that, Jenny. I think, as I mentioned, I did this on the plane and it was something brewing inside me. I'm like, it's their performance. They have to take responsibility. It's their job. And I felt that the managers I were working with were taking way too much responsibility. They were taking it all on. And so that's where we had to really try to switch our thinking to go, well, what can you do? How can you do it? Yeah. And it definitely works better than the old sandwich model. So we're not doing a sandwich model, tell them something good, tell them something bad, tell them something good. We are really focused on where they are now, where they need to be. Yeah. Yep, great, thank you. Sebastian says, in listening and questioning, shall we consider balance between what the employee wants to change and what they should change and make sure they're both aligned? Yes, that's a brilliant addition to our thinking as well. Thanks, Sebastian. So yes, I'm really enjoying these questions, definitely. So what the employee wants to change and what they should change, and make sure they're both aligned. So anything you do there around, so you're suggesting this, I'm suggesting this, let's make sure we're on the same page about that as well. Very important. Thank you. Jenny says, agree, that's why managers need good coaching skills. Yeah, so we are taking a coaching approach. We're listening, having a coaching approach, asking quality questions. Yeah. Catherine says, I find guilt is never a good motivator. I agree with you. I don't like to coach to pain or guilt. Ethically, I don't like it. However, we can talk about impact. That, for me, feels different. She says, whereas making them feel responsible or take responsibility for their action works. She says, I really like this model, maybe a second session after a first grow model session. Yeah, that's a good thinking, actually. Yeah, so I don't see this model in isolation. I do see it in terms of using the grow model for sure. This could be a second conversation, or you could lead into the grow model. And I do see it, as we've talked about, sitting alongside the feedback conversation as well. Yeah, I agree with you there. Yeah. So the other thing I want to emphasize also is that the model can also be used, P can be used in just as a little a set of questions itself, or C could be, the challenges could be just used as a separate set of questions. The improvement questions can be used as a separate set of questions. So you might sit down in a team meeting and say, okay, this week, what do we really need to focus on in terms of continuous improvement? When we think about our team, is there anything we need to change or do differently? That's really powerful, really positive and really powerful. It means that we're continuously focusing on our performance, and we're using this for continuously high performance as opposed to just bringing it up when something's not going right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Jenny says the two hands conflict resolution tool might be good. One for helping them see what each side wants, organisations versus their own. Yes, I'm with you. I was drawing those. I had my arms up, one hand, and my hands were above my head. So we're on the same page from that point of view, thinking about how do we bring this together. Yeah, I haven't got my video on, otherwise I'd just be all arms all over the place. Yeah, thank you. Peter says, this is great. I'm happy to keep the conversation going. Thank you. If you need to drop off, that's totally fine. But if you can stay, I'm happy to. Peter says, I think this all fits well into a systems approach. Oh, now you're talking, you're talking the language of love for me now. I think he says it fits into a systems approach in building the person's understanding that they're not an island in their workplace and that we are all in this together. Yes, it's very true. So we're not islands. Your performance impacts my performance, impacts the team, etc., which means that your high performance has a positive impact on my high performance, which has a positive impact on the team's high performance. So a change in any of the dynamics from that point of view is going to influence us from a systemic point of view, a systems point of view. Yes, goodbye to you, Jodie. Happy Friday to you. I understand if you need to go, so that's totally fine. Yeah, so thinking of this from a systems approach is a really great lens to actually bring to the conversation as well. I agree. Peter says we used to talk about the school being a pond and that we all cause ripples in the positive and the negative, which then somehow touched each of us, including the students. That's a really nice way of thinking about it. Thank you. Yeah. Great. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've really enjoyed the different lenses that you've brought to the conversation and the extra questions you've added in there as well. So I'm really fortunate because I can get the download of the chat box as well. So what I'll do is I'll grab those questions and I'll add them. Not add them into the model, but I can add them into our feed as well as we go. So that's terrific. Great. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Jenny. Says awesome session, lovely discussions. Have a great weekend. Yes, that's right. Kim loves the alternative framework. Happy Friday to you. Yes. And yeah, thank you, Sebastian. Yeah, thanks for your contribution. There is a part 3, so we'll see you next week for the part 3. If you're listening to this live, happy Friday, happy the weekend to you. Thank you so much for your contribution. It's been terrific. And I really look forward to catching up with everyone at our next webinar. I'll say goodbye for now.